Also ich begrüße alle ganz herzlich zum heutigen Abend. Ich habe die große Ehre, Robert Flynn Johnson vorzustellen, der den weiten Weg von San Francisco hierher gekommen ist, um hier vor uns zu sprechen. Und er ist ein ganz großer und auch berühmter Sammler und hat eine besondere Geschichte, denn er war eigentlich Leiter der grafischen Abteilung in San Francisco vom Museum of Fine Arts für 32 Jahre, also der Abteilung, wo es auch neben den Zeichnungen Fotografie gibt und Prints, also Drucke und so weiter. Und war für 32 Jahre und hat aber nebenbei immer privat gesammelt. Und er hat vorhin noch mal erzählt, oft war es so, das Museum hatte kein Geld für Erwerbung und dann hat er es privat gekauft. Und hat auf diese Weise eine fantastische Sammlung zusammengetragen, zum Beispiel mit einem Höhepunkt Degas-Zeichnungen. Ein anderer Höhepunkt sind die Arbeiten von Lucian Freud. Er hat ein Buch herausgegeben oder viele Bücher herausgegeben, aber eins, was sozusagen besonders bekannt ist, was auch ins Deutsche übersetzt worden ist. Auf Deutsch heißt es Anonym. Und er hat sich dabei befasst mit der Frage der anonymen Fotografie und hat auch eben noch mal so im Vorgespräch erzählt, dass ja eigentlich das Auge besonders herausgefordert sei, die Qualität von anonymen Fotografien zu erkennen, denn man sei eben nicht schon vorab irgendwie eingestellt durch die Berühmtheit des Fotografen und man sei komplett darauf angewiesen, die Qualität eben an dem Foto zu erkennen. Und das war mit ein Grund gewesen, warum er sich diesem Gebiet so stark zugewandt habe. Danach kam ein Buch, das heißt The Being Human. Da hat er nochmal speziell eben auch die Fotografie von menschlichen Darstellungen eben sich vorgenommen. Er hat aber auch sich mit Personen befasst, die eine besondere Obsession haben. Zum Beispiel Charles Jones, den ich gar nicht kannte vorher, ein Gärtner, der wahnsinnig faszinierende Fotos von Pflanzen aufgenommen hat. Genau, er zeigt das doch mal hoch. Und auch dann, so habe ich gelernt, die Negative verwendet hat, um den Pflanzen wieder zu ihrem Wachstum zu verhelfen. Also er hat sie praktisch eingeflochten in die Stauden, also sozusagen eine Kombination aus Natur und Kunst, die verrückt ist. Er hat im Moment gerade seine Zeichnungen von Degas ausgestellt in der Fondation Canal in Madrid. Noch bis Anfang Mai kann man das dort sehen. Ein weiterer Sammelbereich von ihm, über den ich auch ganz wenig wusste, das hat mich auch sehr fasziniert, sind Fotos von Ansel Adams, die er aufgenommen hat von den japanisch-amerikanischen, also wie würde man es auf Deutsch sagen, den Japanese American, sagt man im Englischen, also den Amerikanern, die in irgendeiner Weise japanische Vorfahren hatten oder aus Japan ausgewandert waren und die eben dann in eigene Konzentrationslager gekommen sind, hat Ansel Adams 43 Fotos aufgenommen von diesen Inhaftierten in den Konzentrationslagern und hat sie noch während des Zweiten Weltkriegs veröffentlicht, was ja auch wahnsinnig riskant war und mutig war damals. Das hat er auch als ein Sammelgebiet und hat daraus eine Ausstellung gemacht. Und er hat jetzt gerade als zukünftiges Projekt vor, Porträtzeichnungen von David bis Lucian Freud zusammenzutragen und daraus auch ein großes Projekt zu machen. Es ist wunderbar, dass er aus San Francisco hergekommen ist. Es hat übrigens nicht mit unserem Achenbach zu tun, was Sie in der Ankündigung gesehen haben, sondern die Achenbach Foundation in dem Museum of Fine Arts ist eben von jemand, der Achenbach auch heißt, dort finanziell unterstützt worden, gibt aber keinerlei Verwandtschaft zu hier bekannten Persönlichkeiten. Yeah, we are very, very happy that you came today to Düsseldorf, and I can say that today it's also his birthday, and it's so. And we are really, it's so wonderful that you came to speak here, and with Heinz-Norbert Jocks, and I'm glad also that Norbert is, as we so estimated, so well doing the conversation today with Robert Flynn Johnson.
Thank you very much. We have to speak now English. It's my first time, but I have to speak English in Düsseldorf, so I'm a little bit. We will see how it's going. But I want to start in a way because now you are a collector for not a private museum, for.
Okay, good.
So we want to talk about different topics today. I want to start with you as a private collector, but after we have to talk about the relationship between being a private collector and working for a museum and to create a public collection. But before we speak about it, I would know more about you as a private collector. And a very stupid question is, what did you motivate to become a collector? And when I realized it, it was very late, when you were 50 years old and not before. Can you tell me a little bit your story as a private or as a collector and about your motivation?
Well, I certainly didn't start collecting when I was 50 years old. I remember, like so many people, and it's interesting, I was reading, there's a book on the Metropolitan Museum that I was just reading, and it's a very interesting book because it has profiles on 40 or 50 people at the Metropolitan Museum, everybody from the chief guard to various curators, people in the conservation departments, et cetera. And George Goldner, who is the curator of the graphic arts department, the specialist in drawings, old master drawings at the Metropolitan Museum, had the same story that I had, because I was reading about him, and he said that he had a prized collection of baseball cards when he was a little boy, which his mother threw away. Didn't think he was off to camp or something, and when he came back, they were gone. And he was shocked, and the same thing happened to me. My mother missed one, though. She missed a very important card of Ted Williams, which I later gave to my brother, because I come from a family that has, that I had a brother and a sister. I have a brother and a sister. My father was a physician. He was a neurosurgeon. And my parents were both quite cultured, although my mother didn't seem to have much interest in baseball, it seems, when my collection was thrown away. But my father, I think, was hoping that one of us would go into medicine, and we didn't. My sister, who's older than myself, she teaches comparative literature at Columbia. I was an art museum curator for my whole career. And surprisingly, my brother is a curator too. My brother is the chief curator of the Sports Museum of New England in Boston, Massachusetts, which means, like Peter Pan, he never has to grow up. He actually, when he goes to a baseball game, he is working, supposedly. In any case, that's one of the reasons why I gave them that baseball card, because this is his field of expertise. I often think that the world is made up of 99.9% people who don't understand collecting at all. Oh, they buy works that are sold through the commercial enterprises, cars, and clothes and designer items, perfume, etc. But when it comes to collecting a work of art, actually spending serious money on a photograph, a drawing, a painting, a sculpture, it's a very, very, I think, small percentage of the world that really understands that. And there was a wonderful artist, I'll be showing you one of his works later this evening, who was a marvelous artist who, when he was alive, was selling his works for 25 cents a piece on the streets of Montgomery, Alabama in the late 1930s. And he had this man who was illiterate, could not write or read. He had probably one of the most perceptive statements about the nature of collecting I'd ever heard. He said, and it was taken down by a young artist friend of his, he said, concerning the people that actually bought his drawings for 25 cents a piece. By the way, today they sell for $75,000 to $750,000 a piece. He said some people buys them and they don't even need them. And one always knows when reading about the histories of Vincent van Gogh or people like that, or most artists, they have a compulsion to create. They have a compulsion to create, whether that artist is a dancer or a writer or a painter. They have the compulsion to create the works. but the desire to not just simply go to a museum and see a work of art for an afternoon, but actually want to sacrifice, possibly financially, to own a photograph, a drawing, a painting, a sculpture, it's a leap. And one of that leap, in my opinion, is it's a form of falling in love. It's falling in love with the nature and the emotion and the creativity of that work. And in a sense, you see something of yourself in that work, in that artist. And somebody once said that, one should be able to go into your house when you're not there and walk around and get a sense of who you are as a human being and as a person. And if that means you've got an old sofa and a dying plant and a tennis poster on the wall, maybe that tells you something. But in terms of the works of art that you choose to sacrifice and have around your life is, I think, a reflection in a sense of who you are. And in point of fact, it has nothing to do with money. There's so much talk today about collecting and money and status and all of that. And to my mind, that's never been at all anything that I've been interested in. It's been that sense of seeing something in a work of art that I can't get out of my mind. And I would be heartbroken if I could actually afford it. And I hesitated, and half an hour later I came back and there was a red dot on it because somebody else had fallen in love faster than me.
When I'm hearing about what you are speaking, a lot of questions are coming out, and I don't know how to begin. But one question perhaps, what is your self-understanding as a private collector? And you are speaking about the self-reflection. It means there must be an inner relationship between the art piece and the collector. Can you speak a little bit about this kind of inner relationship between the artworks and the human being who is collecting?
Well, in a certain sense, I can only understand in certain aspects about my collecting after I've collected it. For whatever reason, over the years, I've collected portrait drawings for a couple of reasons. One, I find portraits to be both the most, to be, when they're really great, to be the most magical, to be the most incisive. I'm a humanist. I'm much more of a, I don't know, I'm a much more of a Lucian Freud guy than a Mark Rothko guy. And with all due respect to Rothko, I love him, but I'm more of a humanist type guy. And portraits are either the most beautiful or the most boring works of art ever made by human beings. And there's so many horrible portraits that they give the medium a bad name. But the really great ones are really great. And I only realized that I was actually collecting portrait drawings after I bought my 8th or 9th one. I suddenly looked around and said, geez, it seems like there's a pattern here. And so some of this pattern is something that you only learn about over time. This idea that you wake up one morning, you've decided at a certain age that you have some interest in a particular area about collecting, and that you're going to steadfastly go on that narrow track. I don't think that's a healthy thing to do, and I don't think it's a natural thing to do. I think it's something that evolves over time.
Let us speak about Lucian Freud, because one reason is because you prefer him. The other reason is because you was a friend of him. Mm-hmm. Why the portraits of Lucian Freud are for you more important, or in another way, what is the connection, the inner connection between his paintings and his drawings and yourself?
I was very lucky. I mean, I acquired a Lucian Freud before I met Lucian Freud. I acquired one for the museum. I acquired one for myself. I admired the man, and I got a beautiful drawing of his mother for the museum's collection. when Lucian Freud's were very inexpensive. And I acquired one for myself, and I acquired a very difficult one for myself. I acquired a pastel called Man with Head Wound, and it was this guy with this kind of pussy wound on his head. It was very kind of autodixian, you know. And I don't know why I loved it, but it was just so goddamn strange and so intense that I couldn't not live without it, and I could afford it, so I got it. And I thought that was it. Got one for the museum, got one for myself, that was it. And then his dealer, who I was friendly with, said, "Would you like to have lunch with Lucian?" And I said, "Sure." And so I had lunch with Lucian, and I didn't know, but I was auditioning. He didn't tell me I was auditioning, but I was auditioning. Lucian had to decide whether he could put up with me or not. Lucian lived in the world of Lucian Freud, and it was his world, and you just lived in it. After the lunch, the dealer came up to me and said, "Lucian would like you to write on his work for a show, a traveling show that would go to. Would you be interested in writing on him for an exhibition that the British Council was doing in England?" And I said, "Sure." And I ended up writing with a man named Nicholas Penny. He and I co-authored the book. Nick is now the director of the National Gallery in London, so that's he went places. And we did this book. Nicholas wrote on the early works of Lucian. I wrote on the later works of Lucian, and it was an amazing experience because he was an artist that, when I first knew about him, he was like somebody that was in a museum somewhere. He was totally remote. I never thought that I would have an interaction with him, and I did. And he was. I've said to people, I felt like a young actor being in a movie with Clark Gable. You know, this man that I had tremendous respect for, but a little bit afraid of, because he had a personality that was very mercurial, to say the least. But it was a tremendous opportunity. And one of the things, of course, that one has to, I think, somewhat separate, is the fact that Lucian was not a perfect person. Picasso wasn't a perfect person. Lucian had his faults. My God, Degas had his faults. But those faults were not enough to dissuade me from being fascinated with and trying to discern the qualities of Freud's work that made him important in an age in recent decades where that sense of intense scrutiny, artistic scrutiny of the human body and portraiture is very much on the outs. I mean, there's few artists that do it, like Chuck Close, but Chuck Close's photographs have all the insight and warmth of looking at people's driver's licenses. You know, his technique is spectacular. His virtuoso technique is spectacular, and I admire Chuck Close's works, but I gain no insight into the human beings that Chuck Close does portraits of. I find them cold to the touch. Whereas Lucian's works of art, which have a certain a sense of emotional autopsy, which some people hate, I find riveting. And it was very, very lucky. As a curator, I never went around saying I want to meet celebrity artists. This was something that came to me.
Now you are speaking about the dark side of Picasso, the dark side of Lucian Freud. It means you are speaking about the dark side of human beings. And my feeling is what you have an interest in knowing more about the dark side of the human beings too. And the other question is it possible to see this dark side too in front of the artworks of Picasso and Lucian Freud?
Can you see it? Sure, you can see it. I mean, if you look at the bone paintings of the 1920s, which directly relate to his anger and resentment of being married to Olga, you can see it. You can see it in spades. The tragedy, of course, with somebody like Picasso, is that when he was in love with Francois, when he was in love with his children, Paloma and Claude, he did the most beautiful paintings of children that in centuries. And then when Francois walked out, suddenly the light went out, and the kids didn't exist in his art anymore. And so sometimes it's not so much that Picasso paints hatred, it's just he just simply ceases to love. And that sense of the withdrawal is something that that I think you see in the absence so much, not so much in the actual works and arts. Whereas a man like Bacon, of course, Bacon's works of art, Edvard Munch's works of art are the human psyche inside out. You see the inside on the outside. You see it directly in front of you, and they can be very, very painful to look at.
My question was: is it you are interested in knowing more about this dark side in front of your artworks? It means you have an interest in having another idea, not only of the dark side, of the light side of the human beings, in order to have another understanding of the human beings.
I'm not afraid of difficult subject matter. I'm not afraid of difficult themes in art. But some people collect very, very, very minimalist art. They like the most extreme Richard Tuttles or whatever, and that's their sense of kind of extreme. And I guess my extreme is when it comes to the emotions that you see in the photographs I collect, in the drawings I collect.
In order to go a little bit further, you have occupied too with the photographs and the movies of Leni Riefenstahl, right?
I have a few,
yeah.
Yes.
And can you speak about why you did it and what are the interesting points of her works?
Well, the one photograph the one vintage photograph that I have of her work is a vintage film still from the Olympiad, and it's, to my mind, the most beautiful artistic photograph of the whole series in that famous book that she did. It's the photograph of a diver in the pool at the absolute depth of the dive before they turn around and come up, and the bubbles going. And of course, when she made Olympiad, the Nazi Party gave her carte blanche financially to make until recently the greatest film of the Olympic Games. And the photograph I acquired has nothing to do with propaganda. It just happened to be a spectacular image. And of course, I'm also very aware that Leni Riefenstahl did not take the photograph. She directed the photograph, but she did not take the photograph. It was part of the effort and stuff like that. So that is an example of somebody that has a very, very checkered history herself, but the actual photograph that I own would not be dark in any way. Just a great photograph, and I wanted it.
I don't want to put the accent on the dark side of human beings. It's perhaps another day we will speak a little bit more about it.
There's a few dark slide images in the photographs in the images I'll be showing in a few minutes, of course.
But every time when we have spoken together, I realize your way of speaking about photography has to do with the magical aspect and the spiritual aspect of it.
Well, one of the things, somebody once said that paintings are lies that contain truth, and photographs are truth that contain lies. And photographs, because they seemingly are a tiny microsecond of reality, have this capacity to be truthful in what you see, but of course they have all the conniving and planning that a painting can, except it is very often done in an instant, and whereas a painting is something that's is made over time. The other thing that is interesting that I have found, and I don't rate photography better than drawing or painting or sculpture or whatever. I have just found that during the years I've collected, I have been living through the golden age of photography collecting. The first photography auction was in 1969. Before 1969, photographs were thrown in the back of book sales. They were considered, I can't even conceive of the great photographs in the history of photography that were thrown away in the late 19th century and in the first decades of the 20th century. And so, I was lucky enough to know and be friends with somebody like Sam Wagstaff, one of the great early photo collectors, whose collection is now at the Getty Museum and stuff. And the whole nature of getting a handle on the collecting of photography has taken place in just in the last 20 or 30 years. And it's been a great ride being part of that. Very different than collecting old master drawings or even 20th century drawings, which had a long tradition long before I came along. So, but the nature of photography is that it is that aspect that Roland Barthes, who I think wrote the greatest philosophical book on photography ever, called Camera Lucida, talks about, and that is the fact that photographs come at us, thousands of them a week. They come at us in our magazines. They come at us in our newspapers, and most of them we look at and we discard almost immediately. Those photographs have what Barthes refers to as studium, information. It's information. But what happens when a photograph has something else, has something magical? And that's what Barthes referred to as the punctum. Studium is what do you see, and punctum is why do you care? And that hook, that sense of the hook that I see fairly often in my collecting of photography is the thing that is fascinating. And we're not talking about very expensive photographs by very fancy art photographers. Oh, I collect some of those, mostly ones I can afford, which is not a lot. But there's this giant pool of photography out there that is just waiting to be discovered and sorted through. Most of the photographs are boring, but it's amazing how many jewels are stuck, how many needles are in those haystacks. A friend of mine, John Sarkowski, who's now passed away, but he was the director of photography at the Museum of Modern Art for many years. He had a wonderful phrase. He said that there are more photographs in the world than there are bricks. And most of those bricks are as boring as most of the bricks in this building. But amongst those bricks are a couple of that are made of gold, and those are the ones that I've had fun in my anonymous photograph books finding and putting together, so that people can enjoy those few that one can dig out of that haystack.
Let us speak, because you mentioned Roland Barthes, and I think also what his book about photography is the most important, and perhaps he's more close to not the idea, to the perception of photographs. And in this book, he started to write about it after the death of his mother.
Yeah.
And he wanted to find out, or to figure out, a photo where he can find his mother. And the most interesting point is that he found a photo before he was born. And in this context, he is speaking about the punctum. And the punctum, the idea of the punctum in the work of Roland Barthes has to do with subjectivity. And it means Roland Barthes started to speak about photography because he wanted he wanted a fetish of memory of his mother. And what was the fetish of memory when you start to collect?
In terms of photography or just in general?
Both.
Well, I mean, one of the things I should make very clear that as a curator for many years, and as a sensible individual, I'm very aware that if I buy a drawing or a photograph, I don't use it up like a washing machine or a car, or open the bottle of wine and drink it. I'm a custodian for it. I'm a custodian for it. Now, certain people buy a Warhol, and then if it goes up in value, they might take it over to Christie's or Sotheby's and sell it and all that. But I am very aware that ownership of a Degas is nice, but it doesn't confer on me any of Degas' qualities. It's a lovely thing, but Degas made it. I mean, my show that's in Madrid, it doesn't say the Johnson collection of Degas. It talks about Degas. I didn't put my name forward because it wouldn't have been appropriate. I'm also somebody that's aware that I'm a temporary custodian of these works of art. In fact, in the last year, I think I gave away 89 works of art to 3 different museums in the United States. And so I see these works of art that I have as something that is temporary. Now, it might be temporary for decades, but it is temporary. And I think that is one of those things that a lot of the public just doesn't understand about collecting. They say, well, I guess if it goes up in value, you can sell it. But what do you do with it? Well, you do it. You have it on your wall, and it's something that triggers things. That's another thing I think people should understand. That I've often told people that if you're going to start collecting, I don't care what area you're interested in collecting. If you want to collect fabrics, Indonesian fabrics, you want to collect American folk art, you want to collect contemporary photography, whatever you want to collect, the first thing you should do is spend the first 100 euros, 150 euros on books on that subject. Exhibition catalogs, books on those artists, whatever. And then I jokingly say you should put Post-it notes on the pages of all the works of art you adore. And then after you do that, show me the books and tell me how much money you have to spend in a year or so. And then you tell me how much money you have, and I'll take all the Post-it notes off the pages you can't afford. And wherever the pages are still left, those are the things you should look for. Unfortunately, collecting is not like bird watching, where all you need is a good pair of boots, the interest, and a pair of binoculars. If you are going to collect certain things, there's certain things that you still can collect very advantageously, and there's other works of art you just can't afford anymore. I mean, I adore the art of Francis Bacon, and of course I'll never own a Francis Bacon. I mean, maybe I should buy lottery tickets to get a Francis Bacon, but other than that, I'll never own a Francis Bacon. So that's okay. I don't sit around saying, God, I'm so unhappy. I'm really happy with what I can collect, and the things I can't collect, I enjoy through museums and books and things like that. But it's amazing what is still out there that one can collect. And what happens is works of art that one collects, not just seeing in museums or galleries, but one collects, those are windows to the present if it's contemporary art, and they're windows to the past if you're interested in things that are older. I can see somebody buying an old master print, like an Ostade etching, of the 17th century, and having that print become a kind of a little magic thing in their house. Oh my God, I own Adrian Ostade print, and using that to trigger maybe buying some more books and learning more about the Dutch 17th century. And so these things have a back and forth. You read the books, you buy a work of art, you buy more books, you go to more exhibitions, et cetera, et cetera. You maybe read novels from that period. And so the work of art just isn't just an end in itself. It is a door to other experiences, and that's what's happened with me. I've learned so much more about different periods, both artistic but also social, economic, etc., through the works of art that I've acquired both for myself and also for the museum.
Now we have, before we speak about the historical aspect of collecting, I want to make a jump. And you are a lover of drawings and you are a lover of photography.
Mhm.
What is the relationship and what is the difference between the both media for you?
Well, it's interesting. Of course, photography is made with a negative, or at least now it's digital, but most of the photographs I own were made with negatives. And you say, well, my God, if it's with a negative, you can print limitless prints from that negative. But in point of fact, many of the photographs I own that I've bought, sometimes I'll find a great anonymous photograph, and it'll cost me, €5. And if somebody came up to me and said, Robert, I love that photograph. If you ever find another vintage print of that, a little anonymous photograph, I will give you €5,000. And I'd say, keep your money. I'll never find another one of that little anonymous photograph. So in a sense, even though it is a photograph, if they are these anonymous photographs as opposed to photographs by August Sander or somebody like that, if you go to an art fair and the August Sander has a red dot on it, there's a very good chance if you ask around, you could maybe find another dealer that will provide you with that August Sander. Maybe it'd be more expensive, whatever, but you can find those things. You want a photograph of Marilyn Monroe by Richard Avedon? Some dealer will find it for you. But a lot of photographs are essentially unique, almost essentially unique like drawings. And of course, I like drawings. I love prints too, but I found I started as print curator and I drifted into drawings more because prints and drawings are very different things. There's only a small percentage of drawings, maybe 5%, that are drawings that were made specifically to be works of art, to be finished works of art, the way somebody takes an etching plate or a wood block and works through various states to get a finished print. Those things are very, very premeditated. Doesn't mean they're bad, but they're premeditated. Drawings very much, so many drawings in the history of art were spontaneous. They were made as a means to an end. They were meant as studies. They were not meant to be sold. They were not meant to be presented as finished works of art. And because of that, there's a sense of that process, that sense of the energy of creativity that I find in drawings to be staggeringly original. I mean, I was just in Madrid and there was an exhibition, mostly from the Uffizi, of drawings by the great Italian artist Portormo. And, Portormo did his drawings in red chalk like he had too much coffee every day. I mean, the works are just they fly across the paper, and he has a very distinctive style, and he's drawing completely for himself. He's not trying to please anybody but himself. The drawings are searching, not finding, and they're just tremendously exciting. And I was so happy to see it, see the exhibition. So I find drawings to be the most personal of art, much more than sculpture, much more than painting, and certainly more than prints.
Every time when we are speaking now, I believe since 8 or 9 years, you mention very often that the price for this was very low. And with the time I realize, of course, that the money value of artworks are not so important for you, and I realize that it has more to do with what it's very important for you to be perhaps the first eye who has realized how great this artwork is.
Not necessarily. One of the things that you listen, if you're a very, very busy businessman and you have a company and you have employees that look to you to run that company and make it succeed, but you also love art, you do that on weekends. You look in catalogs or magazines in evenings and stuff. And very often you can't go around searching out. Your job is to run that company, but you love the art, and so you buy things, and they're very often you have to pay fairly high prices from fairly predictable sources. One of the things that I did as a curator is I was a professional buyer, in a sense, for my city museum in San Francisco. But that didn't mean that if somebody gave me $100,000, I tried to go out and find $100,000 works of art. If somebody gave me $100,000, I would buy one $50,000 work of art, one $25,000 work of art, one $10,000 work of art, and the rest of the money I would buy whatever I could find that was really good. And by that I mean that my job was both to be a retrospective collector for the museum and an anticipatory collector. A retrospective collector is somebody that when you come to the institution, you realize, oh my God, they don't have a Lucien Freud drawing. They don't have a great Philip Guston drawing. They don't have a Joseph Cornell collage. Well, I bought those things at high prices. The quality, they had to be high prices because I bought them from very good dealers at very high prices because they were the best. So sometimes you have to bite the bullet and do that. I mean, you'll see it in a slide, but I mean, this is the only still life that Rembrandt ever did in printmaking. It's of this Kona shell from 1650, and that cost almost $250,000. But it was a work of art that I chased for 18 years. It had only come up twice before. Once it wasn't a good enough impression, and the other time I didn't have the money. And I didn't think I'd ever be able to get it for the museum, and a great impression came up, and we put the money together and got it. So I'm as proud of some of those expensive things I got, not because we spent a lot of money, but just because the opportunity that we were able to do it. On the other hand, as a curator, as a professional, the people that I always respected in my field was, there's a man named Chick Austin, who was the director of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. Well, he bought a 1937 Mondrian in 1938. I respect him for that. How many museums bought Andy Warhol electric chairs in 1962? You know, the trouble about at least I don't know about European museums, but in American museums, everybody wants to put their money on a horse after it's won the Kentucky Derby and it has the roses around its neck. Nobody wants to go out there and take a chance. And I got hell when I bought the Lucien Freud drawing for $1,100, $1,200. Do we really need this? They would say, "You sure?" And so curators are not just there to buy the expensive things. They're there to take chances for the future. And I'll tell you, the trustees don't like it. The trustees gave me a hard time year in and year out because they wanted brand name. They would have been much happier if I'd went out and bought one thing for $75,000 and one thing for $25,000 and went home. They didn't like the fact that I was buying anticipatorily with some of the money. But in point of fact, that's how collections really get built. I mean, the easiest thing in the world, is to buy 1962, 1964 Ed Ruscha paintings for, $18 million from Larry Gagosian if you have $18 million. But the true worth of a museum curator, especially a curator dealing in contemporary art, is for them to not listen to the marketplace, not listen to the BS that's out there, but to go and visit studios, go and visit galleries, and spend their money wisely. And a good curator with 75,000 euros can buy some very, very fine works of art that a museum will be so happy they have 10, 15 years later. But you need to put your trust in that young curator who is knowledgeable and is energetic and works hard. But if you simply want to wait till the things become very, very expensive and very, very famous, that's easy. It's just a very, very expensive activity.
Before we are speaking about museums, public museums and private collection, I want to finish the topic of private collecting in the way what we try perhaps, or what you try perhaps, to give a description of your collection. And I would like to help you a little bit. What I realize very often when you have shown me artworks you have just bought, I realize very often the photos shows the first or the last moment of something. And so I realized, or it was my impression until now, that you are focused sometimes or often on the first or last moment of something. For example, the last photo made before John F. Kennedy was killed, or the birth of a child. Why you are so interested in these turning points of a history, the private history, and the official history?
Well, I was thinking, I was just in Madrid, and one of the great joys in Madrid is to go into the Thyssen collection. It's an uneven collection, but one of the things it has, it's the only museum, as far as I know, in Europe that has a serious collection of 19th and 20th century American art. It seems that all the museums in Germany and France and England think American art began with Jackson Pollock, because you never see a great Arthur Dove, you never see an O'Keeffe, and God knows you never see an Edward Hopper. In my opinion, Edward Hopper is the greatest American artist of the 20th century, and that includes Johns and all these other people. And Hopper paints these pictures that are terrifyingly human, but in their subtlety, they are drama without narrative. We don't know what's going on in the pictures, but we feel an intensity. And Norbert's right. I am interested in the drama of human life. I'm interested in that drama, whether it is a snapshot. I have actually 2 color snapshots taken by people the day of Kennedy's assassination as the motorcade went by, not news photographs, but ones just taken by citizens, and other photographs like that. But I find the sense of humanity, both in the works I collect, paintings and drawings, but in photography, to be something that it's part of me. I would never collect the amount of the material in my particular area that I ever did for the museum. For the museum, I was collecting a wide range of art that of course was not something that I. Let's put it this way: the works I collected for myself were with my head and my heart, and the works I collected for the museum were very much with my head. It didn't mean that my heart wasn't there, but it was very much with my head. And so there were quite a number of artists that would not mean much to me as an individual on the wall, but for the museum, I knew was important to acquire those works for the collection. So it's a different thing. And I should also mention that the idea of a curator collecting privately is something that is probably somewhat foreign to the sensibilities in Europe. Although in America there are a number of curators and museum directors that I know that were quite frankly mentors to me. A man named Charles Reiskamp, who was the director of the Morgan Library and later the Frick Collection, was somebody who had a great collection, and most of it, a lot of it, has gone to Princeton University and the rest to the Morgan Library. But he did not find that a difficulty in doing his job, nor did I find a difficulty myself, simply because the limited money that the museum gave me, I spent it as absolutely wisely as I possibly could.
Now, your most famous book is about anonymous photographs.
Yes.
It means what you don't make the normal difference between high and low culture of photography.
Yeah, I mean, when I started collecting those works of art, I collected them quite casually. If I'd gone to the museum back in the early 90s and said I want to collect snapshots and anonymous photographs from the museum, they would have quietly led me away to a state hospital and put me in a white room. It was certainly nothing that was being collected at that time. Of course, now the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. did a whole big hardcover book on the history of the snapshot, so I feel like I was way ahead on that one. But I was very quick to mention 5 or 6 people in my acknowledgments in that book, including Sam Wagstaff, to be people that pointed the way to me. When Sam put out his book in the 1970s, he put a very expensive photograph, very beautiful and expensive photographs by a very famous person, on a page opposite a photograph that he paid very little for that was totally anonymous but totally beautiful. And Wagstaff never made any he never made any judgments between the two. It's funny that his lover and partner, Robert Mapplethorpe, was chiding Sam, saying, "Why are you buying those anonymous photographs? They're not by famous people," because Mapplethorpe wanted to be a famous person, and he thought, "Why are you wasting the time on that stuff?" But quite frankly, Sam was right. Sam was buying with his eye, not with his ears, and he bought beautiful things, and he was very much somebody that I tried to emulate when I could. I just saw it as an area that needed to be explored, to be put together. One beautiful photograph. I used the analogy, of course, in my second book, Being Human, that a really, really bad golfer can put their ball on a tee and hit the ball on a par 3 hole and have the ball fly through the air and bounce into the hole for a hole-in-one. But they could take 400 more shots that day and not even hit the green. That one perfect shot does not make them a good golfer, but that one shot cannot be taken away from them as a hole-in-one. Well, the camera allows a complete idiot to take a masterpiece. They can't take a second one, maybe, but they can take one. And what I found in going through the thousands of photographs I go through in flea markets and whatever, that I do find these holes-in-one, so to speak. They are not by people that take them repeatedly. They're just there. And you cannot do that in other art. You cannot find, anonymous great cubist drawings in the Paris flea market. You just can't do it. But you can do it in photography, and I find that a fascinating anomaly to the area of photography. It's like a completely separate. It is a kind of a separate universe to fine art photography, and I don't like one over the other. I just like them both, and it's an area where what other area can you be a serious collector, and the things you buy for your art collection cost less than the lunch you eat that day?
When we were in contact because of this evening, you mentioned what you would like to speak about, and about retrospective collecting and how do you say it?
Anticipatory
collecting. Can you? I have an idea. What does it mean? But can you say it in your way? Retrospective collecting. You are speaking about the collection of a museum, right? And the anticipatory collecting means what you have an eye for something in the future, or what does it mean?
Well, I mean, if a work of art was painted in 2013 or 2014, it has to be anticipatory collecting because it's still wet. It's new. But there you have to be careful because you have all these market forces telling you it's good when it really isn't and stuff like that. And 85 or 90% of the things at Basel, Miami will be forgotten in 10 years. I mean, for sure. Unfortunately, but that's true. There is anticipatory collecting. You can anticipatory collect works of the 17th century, of the 18th century, of the 19th century, of the 20th century. There's lots of areas that are overlooked. And this idea that, there's things that aren't fashionable at certain times. And one can collect in those areas. There's a wonderful line of Woody Allen. He says, if you're bisexual, it doubles your chances of getting a date on Saturday night. And as a collector, if you are interested in more than one area, you can find other areas of collecting that you can be interested in. And so sometimes when I'll go to an antique fair, I remember years ago, 5 or 7 years ago, I went to an antique fair in upper New York State. I was looking for drawings, I was looking for prints, I was looking for photographs, and I couldn't find drawings, prints, or photographs. And this one dealer had this beautiful abstract quilt, 19th century. It was in beautiful condition. It folded out. It was as big as a contemporary painting in the museum across the way. It was that big. It was fantastic, and it was like $50, and I couldn't get it out of my head, and I bought it. Well, I've now got 65 quilts, and I've been getting these quilts because they are so damn beautiful, and and nobody is paying attention to them. And what can you do? There it is. Do I say, well, you know, it's the old story. If I can afford, you know, there's a wonderful line about collecting. The things I can afford, I don't want, and the things that I want, I can't afford. And some people can talk themselves out of collecting by saying, well, you know, I would love a Van Gogh drawing, but I can never afford a Van Gogh drawing, so I'm not going to collect. Well, there are areas that you just find that are very, very accessible, and the important thing is don't collect what everybody else is collecting. Collect what you want to collect, and collect what you can afford to collect. I mean, if somebody came to me and said, I've got 20,000 euros and I want to collect high impressionist drawings, I'm going to say you should collect something else because you don't have enough money to buy impressionist drawings. You know, Elvis has left the building there; it's gone. You can't afford that. So, but the act of collecting it has to be. You have to please yourself first. Don't try to please other people. I mean, there's people there's a wonderful phrase I often use about collecting. Very often, certain people, they're in the right church in the wrong pew. You know, if somebody says to me, you know, would you believe I only spent $400,000 on this Warhol painting? I look at it and I say, I can believe you only spent $400,000 because it's a terrible Warhol painting. There are bad Degas drawings, there are bad Warhol paintings, there are bad Picassos, etc. In fact, I was just at Maastricht. As much as I adore him, there's a terrible, terrible Francis Bacon oil there. Marlborough Gallery can't give it away, I guess, or they're trying to give it away or sell it or something. But it's not a good bacon. It's a bacon, but it's not a good bacon. And so, you know, how do you discern taste? Well, you have to learn those things, and the idea of collecting names is a horrible idea. It's collecting objects, and there's certain objects you can afford and certain you can't afford. But you know, Woody Allen again said, you know, 90% of success is showing up. You know, so you've got to show up. You've got to go to the art fairs. You've got to see these things. You've got to learn. You've got to inform yourself. And you know what's amazing? You buy 1 or 2 photographs or drawings or whatever you're interested in. Each year, at the end of 10 years, you've got a collection. You've got a collection. You've got 30 pieces. And it's amazing how you wake up one day and suddenly you find out you're a collector. A person who has a house that can hold 12 paintings and owns 12 paintings, they're not a collector. They've decorated their house. They might be beautiful 12 paintings, but they've decorated their house. A person who just bought their 18th painting when they have room for 12 is a collector. It's somebody that just can't stop.
How many artworks of the collection of the San Francisco Museum?
Yes, about 120,000 works in the collection, yes.
And the most important point of this museum is what this museum wants to tell this history by the artworks of the collection, right?
Well, I did not have any control over the other. I was not the director of the museum. I only had responsibility for the prints, drawings, and photography collection. And during my watch there for 32 years, I had to build up that collection. And when I got there, I realized that Mr. Achenbach, he was a very nice man. He had great intentions, but he wasn't a very good collector. And so in many cases, we had 12 Cantaletto etchings, and they were all not very good impressions. And so I had to, in certain cases, I had to start from the beginning with certain artists and certain periods. And I had to get some really quality works of art into the collection. I also had, it's very, very important as a curator that if you have a curator and they're there for 20 years, and at the end of the 20 years, the museum has a great Italian drawing collection, and that same curator is completely ignored the French collection, the American collection, the German collection. You know, they haven't done their job because they've simply fallen into what is their artistic sweet tooth. And that was not my job at the Achenbach. My job was to properly balance the collection as best I could, both with gifts, when I could talk people into giving us things, which sometimes I was successful at, and other times when I selectively and tried to stretch as much as possible the funds I had available to go out and acquire works. I often said, you see, in a place like California, San Francisco, I didn't go out and try to buy a lot of Diebenkorns and Thibaults because I knew there were many people in the community that owned Diebenkorns and Thibaults, and those things were going to eventually come to us as gifts. But how many people were going to give us a Delacroix watercolor or a Philip Guston drawing? So those are the works of art I had to go out and get. And guess what? Over the decades, people gave us Diebenkorns and Thibaults because they were in the community. So it balanced out okay. So it's a very dangerous thing if a local community says, oh my God, you know, Ms. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so, he's a big guy in our community. We should spend a lot of money on that artist because at least in America where gifts come to us, you know, those things start to come in. Then suddenly you have a great collection of those people, but you're bereft in other areas. So there's a lot of strategic planning in being a curator and how you spend your money and also how you woo various collectors, because a good curator doesn't collect works of art. A good curator is a curator and a collector of collectors. You must make them dream that their dream as their personal collector should eventually be part of what the museum has as a permanent collection.
Now you are a private collector and you were a collector of a public museum.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference? In which way you have to switch between the both? What other kind of responsibility did you have as a collector of a museum? What was the idea behind of this collection, of this public collection?
Well, I'm a much more active collector now that I've left the museum than I was when I was the curator at the museum. The great thing now is if I go to a place like London, I go to the dealers and I look at the art that I'm just interested in. When I was working for the museum, I ran around like some crazy Cinderella, thinking that he had to do everything possible before his coach turned into a pumpkin, because I had to rush from a Japanese print dealer to an Indian miniature dealer to a dealer of livre d'artiste to contemporary drawings to old masters. I had to deal with all of those things, and so I was always running around. I did not have, the only area that I could pass off responsibility was to Karen Brewer, who was my assistant, who's now the head of the Achenbach, and her specialty was contemporary art. So I did have somebody dealing to a great extent with contemporary art, but everything else I was having to bounce around tremendously with. And that is something that a private collector doesn't have to worry about, but I did. And that was fine. I really enjoyed it. I learned so much. When I came to San Francisco in 1975, I didn't know anything about Japanese prints, Japanese drawings. And now I know an awful lot. And over time, I learned from dealer friends, I learned from collectors, I learned from other curators, and we built up a very, very fine collection of works, of Japanese works for the collection. But that was not an area that I was naturally attuned to. It's something I had to learn.
The last time when we have seen us in Paris, you told me you don't understand yourself as a market goer, more like a fisherman. But a fisherman must travel around. And in which way do you see the relationship between you as a collector and you as someone who has to travel around in order to find out in order to collect?
Well, I don't mean to be mean about some of my colleagues, and I certainly won't mention them by name, but a lot of my colleagues, I'll give an example. Some might be a specialist and know an awful lot about Italian Renaissance drawings, and they know all about the drawings in the Uffizi, and they know the drawings about the Louvre, and they know the drawings in the Fritz Lucht collection, et cetera, et cetera. And that's great. Except one of the responsibilities that you have, those drawings have been in those drawing cabinets for 200 or 300, 400 years. Those drawings aren't on the market. You have to go out into the market in the year 2014 and find a good Italian drawing. Well, guess what? Italian drawings are not as plentiful as they were in 1900 or in 1800. And so consequently, you have to deal with, Lyndon Johnson, President Johnson, had a wonderful phrase called politics is the art of the possible. And as a curator, you have to deal with not only the funds that are available, you have to deal with the works of art on the market. And that's a difficult thing. And some of my colleagues, they are very, very smart art historically, but they have no common sense when it comes to the art market. They're not good business people. And they do not understand the nature of acquiring works of art in the marketplace. And those are the two things you need. If you're going to be a university professor, you can spend your whole life dealing with Italian drawings in the Uffizi because you have no responsibility to go out and try to acquire works of art in this marketplace. But as a curator, you do have that responsibility, and that is one that I took very, very seriously, and I work very, very hard at. And not every PhD curator at a museum is good at acquiring works of art because they live in the past. They live back when they want to buy drawings like the drawing cabinet at the Louvre and the Uffizi, and it just isn't possible in 2014.
Do you collect works because you want to know more about the time, or in order to have another understanding of the history? You are speaking, of course, about the formal and aesthetic aspect of works, but on the other side, I know what you are speaking about, the content.
Well, I remember going with a friend of mine to the Getty Museum a few years ago, and there was a show of Spanish drawings from their permanent collection. And I went through, and my friend is not. She's a good photographer, but she's not an art world professional. And when we finished going through the exhibition, I said, "What did you think of the exhibition?" She said it was one of the most boring shows she'd ever seen. And I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Could we go back and tell me why? And what did you like and what didn't you like?" And she went back, and we went through the gallery. There's only 35, 40 drawings. And she said, "These are the drawings I liked." And she pointed out these very strong, very powerful, very beautiful Ribera drawings, and these very strong, very powerful, very beautiful drawings by Goya. And she said the other drawings didn't interest her. And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Look at them." And she had a point. You know what the point was? They were very sketchy, very loose, very indistinct, but they were studies for very famous paintings. So they were like inside baseball. They were things that if you're a specialist in Spanish art would say, well, this has to do with the working of the corner of the altarpiece. And so a lot of the drawings that the Getty has bought over the last 20, 30 years, a lot of them are drawings that are specialist drawings with spare no expense budgets that are studies or related to very, very famous paintings. Now, having said that, those drawings have a great deal of interest to specialists, but to the person, to the reasonably intelligent individual that walks into that gallery, those drawings are little sketches. They don't have much emotional power to connect directly that drawing to the individual. The Riberas did, the Goyas didn't. I mean, the Goyas did, the Riberas did, a lot of the other drawings didn't. I understand your point. Are the other drawings bad? Should they have not bought them? Of course not. That's fine. That's their business. But one of the things that I tried to do when I was curator of the museum with limited funds, I tried to buy works of art that would connect with people. I tried to buy works of art that would have a kind of universal attachment to the person looking at it. That wasn't just some specialist drawing for some that was some obscure study for some famous painting. I tried to buy works of art that the person decades, 100 years in the future could come to San Francisco and emotionally connect with. I really would like to show some things because we've been talking a lot, but nobody. I think people would like to see some of these works of art.
One last
I
question.
got 35 of them, you see, so there's...
It's allowed. One last question.
Okay.
When you create, when you were a creator of the collection of a museum,
Yes.
do you understand it only as the creating of an art history, or it's at the same time a way to create the history of the history by artworks?
Well, coming to a museum, our collection of works on paper began in 1948, so that it already had two curators before I was there, and I was fully aware that my perception, my taste, the works of art I acquired or got to be given was only part of the problem. Collecting is a journey; it's not a destination. I mean, it might be a destination for some person who's egomaniacal. It says this is it, you know, but it isn't it. There were things that were there when I got there, and there's things now through the present curator that took over from me that would have been different than I'd collected, and there will be future curators that will build on it. It's all built on other people. You know, one stands on other people's shoulders. I just took great pride in being in one place for a long period of time, 32 years, and so I was able to make a certain statement in what I was able to acquire for that collection, which will be, and I was very, very aware. I come from the East Coast. My family's from New England. I was very aware that the Metropolitan Museum, the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, even out there at Chicago Art Institute, they were decades ahead of us, and I always felt that we were, you know, really behind the eight ball. You know, I can remember I bought a very important color print by Mary Cassatt. These great color prints that Cassatt did in the 1890s. The one that I bought was so beautiful that Degas said it was intolerable that a woman could draw so well, being Degas and dig it as his friend Cassatt. And somebody said, well, why did you need another one of those color prints for your collection? And I said, you son of a, what do you mean another one? This is the first one we've ever had for the collection in San Francisco. Whereas back east, many of those collections had 8, 10, 12 of these color prints. So I was very often having to buy the first one in some of these series. So anyway, you know, one does what one can during one's period of time, and then one gracefully hands the baton off to another curator, and they will have their point of view too. There is no right way to do it, but there is the way that that you feel as strongly about. And I always thought of the money as I took the expenditure of the city funds, the museum funds, the donor funds, very, very seriously. And I fought tooth and nail with dealers to get the best price, et cetera, because I knew any money that I was able to save could be utilized for another work of art.
It was really my last question. I close my mouth now and let do what you want to do.
Can we show? Okay. Right. Okay. I've just got a few. I've got a few works of art I would like to show you all. A few works of art I acquired for the museum over the years, and a few works of art after that from my own personal collecting. The work you see on the screen, I'm happy to say, was turned down by the Getty Museum. They didn't think it was important enough. I was vetting an art fair in New York a number of years ago. I think it was 2000, 2001. And I went on the stand of some dealer friends of mine from Boston. I saw this on the stand, and I knew what it was. And I said, is that what I think it is? And they said, yes. And I said, is it available? Which is always an important question, because if it's got a red dot, you know, you're out of luck. They said yes, and then they told me the price, and I said, well, I'd like to reserve it. And I called up my director in San Francisco, and I explained the whole situation to him. And I said, it's a fantastic opportunity. He said, no. And I said, why are you saying no? You haven't even seen it. He said, it couldn't be any good. It's too inexpensive. And I said, no, it's really, it's. Anyway, he said no, and luckily I called up a dear trustee of my museum and told her, you should buy it for your own collection, and she trusted me and she bought it. And when it came back to San Francisco, I said to her, I said, listen, I hate to say this, but could you possibly allow me to see if I could still try to buy it for the museum? Would you give it up if I could do that? And her husband said, forget it. And she said, no, let Robert try to do it. And we did, and we got it. What this is, it's a drawing, it's a drawing by Michelangelo. It's a drawing that Michelangelo did. Obviously, by the way, the price offered, $75,000 for Michelangelo drawing. Hello? It's not a Madonna's head. If it was Madonna's head, it would be $40 million. But it's a working drawing by the greatest sculptor of his age, and it's a drawing where he is, where he's making his intentions known to the quarry for a piece of marble that he needed for one of his sculpture or one of his architectural commissions. So it's a working drawing by a working artist. I've got a feeling if he were alive today, Joseph Beuys would love this drawing. Here's a drawing that's more finished for those of you who like finished drawings. This is a drawing that I bought, and it is a drawing of the beekeepers. And it's a mystery because there are two other versions of this drawing in existence. The one that's considered the, quote, original is in the museum cabinet in Berlin. There's a very poor copy of this, not very well done, in the British Museum, and then there's this drawing. And one thinks that it is that Bruegel did this drawing, and he was to send it to, I think, Peter van der Heyden to make an engraving after it. But I think that in this particular case, there's a very good chance that a replica was made so that the drawing that would go to his engraver could go to him, and that Bruegel could keep a copy. The drawing has great qualities to it. If it is a copy after the drawing in Berlin, so be it. It wasn't, but it is an amazingly moving drawing. And it was one of the first major drawings I bought for the collection. And it came from the collection of Robert Lehman, the great collector there's the whole Lehman wing at the Metropolitan Museum. So by all rights, it should have been in the Metropolitan Museum's collection, except Robert Lehman gave it to his son, and his son sold the drawing, and I was able to acquire it for the Achenbach. Here's the shell by Rembrandt. 1650, a fabulous, beautiful impression. It's a very rare print. There's very few impressions. As I said, I think 2 or 3 impressions have come about in my adulthood onto the market, and we were able to acquire this from a certain institution here in Dusseldorf named C.G. Berner. So it came from them. I love it because I love Morandi, and I see this as a 17th century Morandi. It has the qualities, timeless qualities of a great still life. And also it's amazing because it shows the exploration of the Dutch in the 17th century in that this shell, although it's a very common shell that you can buy at a shell shop today, in the 17th century was a very, very rare shell from the South Seas. And so in a sense, it was almost like owning the equivalent of a moon rock today. It was something fascinating from a very, very distant part of the globe. And so it's a wonderful aspect of Rembrandt's intensity of observation, and also him picking up on the sense that when, Rembrandt was a great collector of everything, so much so that he eventually went bankrupt. And here we have an example of this shell that he obviously thought of very, very highly. George Stubbs, one of the great English artists of the 18th century, and this is one of his masterpieces. And this is one of the areas where, there was a director of the Metropolitan Museum named Francis Henry Taylor. He was a great director, but he was rather discouraging to their print and drawing department. At the time, they didn't have a photography department. Now they've got a good one. But back in the 1940s, he used to refer to the prints and drawings department as the waste paper basket of the museum. That's where the paper went. And he was very, he was a medievalist, and so he loved, he loved Tillman Riemenschneider and all these wonderful wood carvings and things, and he didn't think much of works on paper. But when you look at a work like this, this mixed engraving method print by George Stubbs is as great as any Stubbs paintings. And when you see prints of this quality, you realize that the graphic arts at their highest level, such as the shell I just showed you, and this George Stubbs print, they don't have to have second fiddle to any other works in other mediums. And you can say the same thing about Albrecht Dürer's great engravings from the early 16th century. This is an artist named Ledoux. He was an architect. A lot of his prints are a lot of the engravings and prints he did are fairly mundane architectural pieces, but this particular one here is truly extraordinary. It is a work from around 1800, but it has the qualities of surrealism written all over it. It's an extraordinary piece, and I've never seen it. I've saw it one other time. I was able to buy this print individually. Somehow it got out of the book that it was in decades or centuries ago, but I've only seen it one other time in a volume. But it's an amazing work of art of that particular period. I'm friends with a German dealer named Emanuel von Baer, who's based in London, and he happened to give me a flyer for an upcoming exhibition or a fair of which his work of art was going to be featured in it. And so I immediately spotted it, rang him up, and was the first in line to acquire this paper cut by Hans Christian Andersen for the museum's collection. And he told me there were about 14 museums after me that wanted it. Hans Christian Andersen, quite frankly, I have to admit, I did not know he was an artist, a visual artist, until I saw this piece, and I've learned much more about him. Unfortunately, many of the drawings, many of the paper cuts he gave that are fascinating and beautiful, he gave them to children as presents, and you can imagine what happened to them. But it's a work that I'm really happy we have in the collection. Japanese prints. This is one of these crazy ass Japanese prints I bought for the museum over the years. It's a cat made up of cats, and I was very envious going over to the Old Master Museum here today in Dusseldorf, seeing all those wonderful Netsuke that are in the collection there, and they're just so wonderful. And the Japanese have such a great sense of humor, and I don't know if any of you got a chance to see the Shunga show of erotic Japanese art at the British Museum last fall, but if there were an erotic Olympics, the Japanese would win the gold medal for sure. Here we have an interesting print. This is by the great French artist Manet, and it is a print, but in a sense, it's a 19th century press photograph. It's as if this were a photograph of an actual event. Manet, of course, was not in Mexico. Manet did not witness the execution of this crazy Austrian that was sent to be the puppet ruler of Mexico by Napoleon III. But it is a very, very powerful work, both in painting and also in this print. Manet worked very hard on the stone, and then he was told by Napoleon III's people that he was not allowed to print the lithograph for political reasons. And the print workshop said, well, if we're not going to print it, can we erase the image on the stone? And Manet said no. He bought the stone and put it aside. And after Manet's death, and after Napoleon was kicked out, Manet's widow printed an edition of 50. So the print did get eventually printed, but not until after Manet's death. And it's a very powerful print because it's both impressionism and political at the same time. Interesting. This is not a Gap T-shirt ad of the 1860s. This is a photograph by Alexander Gardner of one of the Lincoln conspirators. This is the man who attempted to assassinate Secretary of State Seward on the same night that Abraham Lincoln was killed. And this is a photograph that was taken of the prisoner, a man named Payne, on the ironclad before his trial. He was eventually hung for the crime. And a couple of things. One, this photograph is reproduced in camera lucida. It was a photograph that Roland Barthes talks about. He says, I look at this photograph and I say, this man, Louis Payne, is a beautiful young man. And I say, this man is an assassin. And I say, this man is going to hang till he dies. And these photographs, that's one of the things about photographs that are amazing, is photographs have this sense of time past. One doesn't necessarily look at a painting and say, all those people in a crowd scene in a Manet painting in the Tuileries are dead, but one has that sense of time locked and time passing when one looks at photographs. Edvard Munch, Norbert talks about my dark side as a curator. Well, I guess this is one of the high points of the dark side, this woodcut by Edvard Munch. I love the story about this. We had a support group at the Achenbach, and you could join the Achenbach support group. It was called the Graphic Arts Council for quite a small amount of money, like $50. And this couple that I knew slightly were $50 members. They were not high. They did not have a lot of money, it seemed. And they were $50 members, and I got along with them fine. And one of them passed away, sadly, and then the second one passed away. And after the wife passed away, the Achenbach found out that they did not have children, and they left their entire estate. They let 5% to Guide Dogs for the Blind, 5% for an organization called Meals on Wheels for older people, bringing hot meals to older people, and 90% of the collection of their estate went to the Achenbach, as long as it was for works of art created before 1900. And this Edvard Munch was 1896, so I snuck it in by 4 years into the collection. And I can't remember how much this cost, but it was between $100,000 and $200,000. We did not have a color woodcut by Edvard Munch, and because of this wonderful couple who left us this funds, we were able to buy a work of art like this that under normal circumstances would have been far too late to acquire. That was rather large. This was very small. This was only like 4 by 5 inches. I bought this from an English woman named Jane Roberts, who's a dealer in Paris. And it's an absolutely perfect little piece of Italian futurism. It has energy, it has color, it has words, it has all of what you would want to have in a piece of art history having to do with futurism. And futurism is a very hard area to collect in. It's fairly uncommon on the market, and this fit perfectly into our collecting needs. One of the areas that people somewhat overlook, and quite frankly, this is an area that one still can very, very aggressively collect in, and that's in the area of modern posters. When I say posters, I mean vintage posters. This is a poster from, 1925 or something, and it is a vintage poster from 1925. It's by the great French poster designer Cassandra, and it is for the Nord Express. It's a railroad a poster for a railroad, and it is a spectacular work of art. You could put this on a wall, and it could hold its own with constructivism, precisionist, Neuzacklichkeit painting of this particular period. And one of the things I find important is that posters like these should hang with paintings. They should hang with prints, because with just regular art prints, because they are very much, I think, a somewhat neglected area that tells us not only about the artistic period of the time, but also the sense of what people actually were looking at on the walls of the train stations and the streets and stuff like that. They were the art of the streets at that time. This is a work of art which is one that was one of the last works of art I bought before I retired. I was very lucky in the sense that I saw the work of art at an exhibition the day before an acquisition meeting, and so I only had 24 hours to make my pitch, find the money, and put it together. The money was not a problem because we'd been saving up some money for something very, very important. And this work of art, I thought artistically was a no-brainer. It's a great collage by Schwitters. My director, who I didn't get along with very much, he was a bit of a snob, and I was able to put the cap on the bottle by not only saying that this was an important Kurt Schwitters collage in good condition, et cetera, but it also had been owned by Mies van der Rohe, the great architect, and so that pushed it across his snobbish goal line, and we were able to acquire it for the collection. This is Gerhard Richter. It's from 1967, and I think it's a great work of art, a great Richter. And it also is a Richter that wasn't very expensive because when it was originally made, it sold for 5 D-Mark. It was in a large edition, but that didn't bother me. It was a terrific work of art, and I acquired it for the collection, and I acquired an impression for my own collection a few years later. Ed Ruscha. Ed Ruscha is special for me because just as I really loved Freud's work, I really loved Ed Ruscha's work, and I was lucky enough over the years to become a very close friend of Ed Ruscha's. And when he got angry at the LA County Museum for the way they treated an exhibition he was having because they had some bad management and the director didn't know what the hell she was doing, Ed Ruscha made his collection of graphic works available to the Achenbach to purchase so that we would have the greatest collection. I had the great archive of Ruscha's works. And so for a relatively modest amount of money, we acquired 1,300 Ed Ruscha's. 1,300 Ed Ruscha's, all the different working proofs, color proofs, etc., of all of his editions, with the condition that we get one of every print he ever does into the future. And we were able to cap that off about 10 years ago. And I'm delighted that we are the place to go when it comes to this great American artist's works. And it's in California. Now we go to a few, in closing, I'll go rapidly through some of mine. The first little Degas that I ever bought was in 1973. By the way, the original is about 2 inches by 3 inches by 2 inches. So this obviously is gigantic. Everything about this was wrong. The wrong subject. It was not a ballerina. It was not horses. It was 2 trees. It was the wrong medium. It was a monotype. And it was small. So everything was wrong about it. But I loved it, and I could afford it, and I bought it. The work that caused me the most trouble with Degas was this drawing, which I bought not too many years later, when the museum that I very much wanted to buy it for the collection, I'd already spent, it was my own fault, I already spent some money on some very important old masters and 19th century works for the collection. And about a month and a half later, this photograph arrived on my desk. The director said that we had no money for it, and I was allowed to try to buy it myself, which after great effort, I was able to do after raising some money and tossing works out of my collection to raise the money. And of course, that was 30 years ago, and I still, of course, have the drawing. This is a work of art that I acquired just this past May. I went to an antique fair in Massachusetts. There's a place called Brimfield. Maybe I shouldn't be telling you this because this is a great place to find things. No, I will. It's called Brimfield in Massachusetts. It's a open-air antique mart that happens 3 weeks a year, 2nd week of May, 2nd week of July, 2nd week of September. And 500 or 700 dealers come and set up out on the grass, and you look at things and you either buy them or you don't. And this is a work of art that nobody was paying attention to. And it knocked me over because it's a masterpiece of American folk art. It's a gentleman who has passed away. He ran a hardware store. He died in 1861. And he's in his coffin surrounded by all the things he sold in his store. It's kind of staggering. I find it beautiful. The frame is hideous, but it's the original frame, so I'm not going to take it off. Sorry. This was mentioned earlier. Charles Jones. Charles Jones was this individual who was a gardener in England. He was born in 1859. He was born in 1866 and died in 1959. And he started taking photographs of the things he grew. And he never showed them to anybody. And his whole life work was discovered in a trunk in the Bermondsey Antique Market in London in the mid-1980s. Unfortunately, I wasn't the person that found it. But I found the man who did find it, a crazy-ass Irishman named Sean Sexton, who kind of had them hidden under his bed. And I convinced him to do a book about this man's work because he was kind of occasionally putting one up at auction, but he was treating these things not properly. And the rest is history. There's a book on Charles Jones's photographs in, I think, 4 different languages, including German. So you can find a book on Charles Jones. And the photographs are extraordinary. Not a single negative exists. As was mentioned, late in life, he used the negatives, the original negatives, as cloches in his garden to protect his vegetables in the springtime. And so there's not a single negative that exists. And all of the photographs were vintage and original. And they're heartbreakingly beautiful. And because the man did not take them in like Victorian dishes and things like that, the works look like they were taken last week. They have this amazing postmodern quality. Another artist, here you see in a frame, another artist that, I love these quirky people like Jones and this man here, Wilson Bentley his name is, and Wilson Bentley is famous for taking micro photographs of snowflakes. Now, to take a photograph of a snowflake, you can't take it into the studio. You have to take it out in the freezing cold, and it's not that easy. And Wilson Bentley lived in Vermont, in New England, and he's a sweet guy. He published a book called Snow Crystals the year he died in 1931. And when he published the book, he insisted the book be without any copyright so that anybody could use, for any reason, both scientific or commercial, all the images that he had photographed over his years doing this. And he's a cult figure today. In fact, when I first told my daughter about Wilson Bentley, she said, "Wilson, Snowflake Bentley, I know all about him." And I said, "How do you know about him?" She said, "Dad, you don't know anything." And I said, "Yeah, it's true." Well, then she showed me this book called Snowflake Bentley, which won the Caldecott Prize for the best children's book of 1999. So, little school children know all about this man long before I knew as much as my daughter did. This is a work by that man I referred to you earlier. This is by Bill Traylor. Bill Traylor was born in 1854, a slave, an African-American in Alabama, and he made his first works of art at age 85. He worked for 2.5 years, two and a half years. He made almost 1,000 drawings in 2.5 years. And when World War II began, he stopped. He went off to live with one of his children. And after the war, he never made another work of art again. He died in 1947 at 95. And his works of art are extraordinary. They have that kind of quality that you have in the Art Brut Museum in Switzerland and Wolfley and people like that, except he does the opposite of Wolfley. He is a minimalist, as opposed most of these self-taught artists kind of fill the whole page, the horror vacui. He makes these work look like Brancusi's. If you notice here, the work of art is a pair of animal legs with a pair of human legs above. Absolutely extraordinary work of art. By the way, that's hanging on a bookcase of mine. That's what you see on the various books in my collection. This is a work of art. We're almost through. This is a work of art by Dora Maar, and this is a self-portrait of Dora Maar, which she cut in two. And the drawings were cut cleanly enough so you could put those two halves together in such a way that you would not know that it was cut in two. But of course, I wasn't going to do that. That's the whole point of this story, and to see the drawing like this. I consider Diane Arbus to be one of the really great photographers of the 20th century. I love other great photographers of the periods of the 20th century. But one of the things about Diane Arbus is that Richard Avedon and Irving Penn took photographs of beautiful young women, models. They also took photographs of very famous people, and they took photographs with their own signature style. Famous people would go to their studio, and an Avedon looks like an Avedon. It doesn't look like a pen, and a pen looks like a pen. But what happened was that Diane Arbus went into Central Park and took just as good or better photographs of nobodies. I mean, her photographs are so extraordinary because she went out and took the raw material of just the people on the street and made them into absolute classic after classic after classic. The other thing that I love about her is that unlike somebody like Cartier-Bresson, who kind of would sneak around and take wonderful photographs of things happening around him where he would kind of visually overhear things, almost all of Arbus's photographs, the person who is in the photograph has tacitly allowed themselves to be photographed. She didn't sneak around and take photographs from people from behind and stuff like that. Almost her photographs are all front and forward, and the people, even if she only knew them for 30 seconds, they agreed in a sense to allow themselves to be photographed. And although I know all of her very famous images of giants and dwarfs and midgets and all that stuff, this is the photograph that is my favorite, because this little girl has met Diane Arbus, and guess what? She has met Diane Arbus, and she's her equal. She stares back at Arbus just the way Arbus is staring at her, and it's a real standoff. This is a Lucien Freud drawing of his mother. This is a drawing. This is not the one that I bought for the museum. This is one that was bought a number of years later by my parents, who left it to me. It's interesting reading about Lucien these days in that he did not get along very well with his mother. They constantly fought. But after his father died, his mother went into a deep, deep depression. And Lucien did these drawings and paintings of his mother, not so much because he was wild about his mother, because he wasn't, but his mother was suffering emotionally. And Lucien felt the need to be supportive of her, and he used the excuse. He didn't just want to sit there and talk with her, so he made her his model, and he did these amazing portraits, probably the greatest portraits of an artist's mother since Rembrandt's portraits of his mother. Here's a work of art. This is from my press photographs, and what's interesting about this historically, I knew this photograph from a very, very popular postcard in the Imperial War Museum in London. I never thought I would find the original. I eventually found the original, and when I got the original, I found that in point of fact, this photograph had been acquired during World War II by the Germans, and the Germans printed up tens of thousands of this and dropped them as propaganda over England, claiming that Winston Churchill was a Chicago gangster. This is, again, the sort of press photograph that I adore. I adore it because I have vertigo. I'm not big on heights and stuff. And when I see photographs like that, it just makes me crazy. Can you imagine this guy does this for a living? Or he did it for a living. I don't know whether he was about to become a former person by standing on his head. This, by the way, is the Ferry Building in San Francisco around 1930. So, I mean, I see photographs like this, and I know it's not Picasso, it's not Lucien Freud or whatever, but there's something about human life. I often say about some of my photographs, they're not about art, but they're about life. This is also about life. This is a daguerreotype from the 1850s, and this is a photograph of this little girl, about 8 years old, and somehow her parents thought it was a good idea that she posed with her dead daughter, or dead sister. And here she is posing with her dead sister, and there's a little notice of her sister and a little lock of the poor little girl's hair. And when one sees these photographs, they seem macabre, but you have to understand that when these photographs were taken in the 1840s and 1850s, very often the child had not been photographed or drawn or anything, and suddenly this poor little kid dies, and if they didn't take a photograph of the child dead, they would have no visual record whatsoever of that child. And so they didn't do it from any sort of morbidity, morbid sensibility. They did it out of tremendous sadness, but they did it out of desperation. And so these early photographs today, if a little child gets sick and dies at age 1 or 2 or something like that, people have hundreds, thousands of photographs and video and everything else. But in these days, they had nothing. And these photographs are not acts of morbid curiosity; they were acts of desperation. And I find this particular one very sad and very beautiful. And here is a photograph, again, a snapshot from my collection. It is as beautiful as anything by Lartigue or Cartier-Bresson or Cortez, as far as I'm concerned. It's an anonymous photograph. We'll never know who took it. But it's extraordinary, the sense of energy, composition, curiosity, the whole choreography of this photograph is fantastic. And finally, just give you a sense of my house, my environment, how I live. Here's a photograph of a wall of my kitchen. By the way, Urban, I bought that at a flea market in Berlin a couple of years ago. A corner of my dining room and my back room. I call it the Ed Rouchet suite because when I finished the room, Ed was the first person who was the overnight guest there. It wasn't quite so crowded at the time. Anyway, that gives you a kind of a sense of at least the journey I'm on. I hope I've been somewhat helpful in giving you a sense of some of the motivations that are involved with what I do as a collector. As I said, it is a journey. It is not a destination, and it is a very, very personal thing, and it is something that you must find your own way with. You will find, however, that in any area you start collecting in, you will find that you're collecting something else, not just the art. You're collecting friends. You're collecting other people and other experiences. You find people that collect photographs or whatever, even quilts. One of my best friends now is a textile restorer that fixes some of my work, my quilts and stuff. And so I often, there's an old saying about the Soviet Union that people said that I pretended to work and they pretended to pay me. And I've often felt that my role as a curator over the years and now as a collector is that it is a lifestyle choice, a lifestyle of experiences, of the art, the artists, and the discovery and the chase. And it is a really, really exciting thing to do. And it's something that I recommend to anybody.
I say first, thank you very much. And I don't know if you are tired or if you would like to hear some questions.
If anybody wants to ask questions, but if anybody needs to go, that's fine. But if anybody has a few questions, I'd be delighted to attempt to answer. I'm sorry, I wish I would love when I was supposed to go down the conveyor belt for language dexterity, God was at lunch. And so I've never been good at language. Unfortunately, he gave me extra space in my head for visual memory and other things. So, there's a wonderful phrase of a man named Will Rogers who said, everybody's ignorant just in different subjects. And so I'm sorry, my language is not one of them. But if anybody has a question, I'd be delighted to attempt to answer. Anybody? Well, anyway, thank you so much for coming tonight. And if anybody is smart, they will go to Madrid this spring because there's a major show of Cézanne, there's a major show of Pontormo, there's a major show of Picasso, and there's my humble show of Degas. So, if you can stand getting on a Ryanair plane, go to Madrid because there's amazing things happening there, even though the country is hanging by fingertips. All right, well, thank you so much.
Also ich möchte mich noch verabschieden auf Deutsch. Vielen Dank für Ihr Kommen. And again, thank you very much for your coming from to Düsseldorf.
Thank you.